Thank you. Good morning, everybody. We are very excited to be presenting to you today. And we've done aspects of these kinds of discussions with our volunteers and with each other, especially with our interns and staff. And so it was a great opportunity to be able to put all of this together for you. And we learned a lot in the process. So I'm going to go ahead and share our PowerPoint. So here we are. So this is our title, Incorporating an Intersectional Framework and Client-Centered Approach to Volunteer Work. And what we're going to go over today is I'm going to do the introduction to Casa Cornelia. We're going to discuss concepts of positionality, intersectionality, because that's how we're approaching being client-centered and helping our volunteers better understand our clients' realities. Stephanie, our managing attorney for the Pro Bono program, will talk more specifically about working with the volunteer attorneys and mentoring them using this concept. And then Ismail, who is our support services coordinator at the law firm, will give you a profile of our clients and how we try to connect them with the support services that are needed as they go through this very traumatizing process. I'm sure you're all aware that immigration law is. So a little bit of, you have my bio, but a little bit of my background is I've been practicing since out of law school in the space of human rights, immigration law, but specifically in the area of gender-based violence. And so a lot of what I had to do in those early years with now commemorating the 30th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act, I picked up along the way without having terminology like trauma-informed anything. So this has been quite an adventure for a lot of us in the field that had tried to put ourselves in the shoes of our clients and try to make the system as least traumatizing as possible. So what we will discuss today is how we help our volunteers take on the trauma-informed approach through recognizing your positionality and the need to adopt an intersectional lens to better recognize and support your client through the legal process and hopefully beyond that. And then working with immigrant clients who've experienced trauma and other difficult circumstances. Our client-centered approach requires that the volunteer be trained also, not just on the substantive law, but trained to recognize these vulnerabilities. Our mission, we've been around for over 30 years. Casa Cornelia Law Center, we are a public interest law firm, and we provide quality legal services to victims of human and civil rights violations. We have a primary commitment to the indigent persons within the immigrant community in Southern California. And we seek to educate others regarding the impact of immigration law and policy on the community and public good. And you'll see why the second part is essential, because it's not just about us helping individual clients. We also want to help change hearts and minds and get support for human rights work. So our center addresses 3 humanitarian-based legal areas under immigration law. And each of them have their own unique challenges. So I'm not going to use today to go over each of these, but just so you know, we have our litigation, also called our asylum program. We have our unaccompanied children's program, and we do a lot of CIJS work and some overlap with asylum, and victims of crime program. And so that's predominantly the U visas, VAWA, some T visas. And so those are mostly victims of gender-based violence. And within those areas, the common challenges, because we're dealing with human rights violations, the challenge is that we're dealing with individuals who suffered human rights violations. And they continue to experience a repeated trauma. And they have to trust in or have no choice but working within a legal system within this framework that's really not designed to address the visible and the invisible barriers to obtaining justice. And so I'm sure a lot of you know, if we lose a case, especially an asylum case, the human impact is real. The person will have no legally recognized identity. It can increase their vulnerability to harm and exploitation, especially for our children. And it can result in their death, especially when I'm thinking about the asylum cases. I primarily worked with victims of domestic violence, and that's always in the back of my mind, that what will happen to this person if they're not able to get the relief that they seek. So one thing that has been helpful is to look at the concept of intersectionality and reframing what we're talking about. And I used, this is coined by the feminist legal scholar Kimberly Crenshaw in 1989. The concept of intersectionality is, quote, a lens through which you can see where power comes and collides and where it interlocks, it intersects. And this concept will help us focus on what we may not readily see or understand. And it's not, as quoted here, it's not simply that there is a race problem or a specific gender problem or a class or an LGBTQ problem. Many times the framework of race is what happens to people who are subject to all of these things. So this is how I have worked with, I'm also a law professor, that's how I've been working with my students, and this is a concept we've applied also to working with our interns here and volunteers, because these intersecting and overlapping identities and forms of oppression, discrimination, the experiences with that based on your specific identities of gender identity, sex, race, ethnicity, nationality, class, sexuality, disability, religion, etc. We can now begin to challenge ourselves a bit more to recognize the power dynamics that our clients experience in the realities that we may not ourselves have experienced. The other concept, and this is something that was relatively new to me because I just finished also, it wasn't enough to go to law school. I just finished my master's degree, Master's of Arts in Women's Studies at San Diego State. And so I was steeped into the concept of situated knowledge and positionality, Haraway's situated knowledge. And this concept that we have a limited understanding of what we think we know or what we thought we knew. And positionality, I have a quote here, refers to the personal values, views, and location in time and space that influence how one engages with and understands the world. And it's wrapped up in the dynamics of power and privilege. Example, your gender, race, class, and other aspects of your social identities influence and inform how you move through the world, what knowledge you produce and value, and the biases through which everything you say, think, and do is filtered intentionally or otherwise. And it can be experienced differently in different contexts and can dictate how much access, which is important, you have to resources, support, et cetera, in society. So we really have to be mindful of this. And I give you this as a background because I want to take you to my own positionality and what drew me to the work of gender-based violence in the space of immigration law. So I had experienced my own form of what I later learned to coin as the racialized form of sexual harassment in the workplace. At the age of 19 in 1990, so you can do the math and see how old I am now. And it was epitomized really by the comment that my harasser made, which is that Filipino women make the best mail order brides. At 19 in 1990, I had no idea what a mail order bride was. So I couldn't really comment on it, didn't really know what that meant. It took a good 23-year legal career working on gender-based violence cases representing predominantly marginalized immigrant women of color to start to begin to understand and unpack that, why I couldn't really separate my experience of being targeted and dismissed both for my race, being Asian, and gender as a woman. So towards the end of, or towards the mid to latter part of the pandemic, we're still in the pandemic, my Asian Filipina clients in particular, who were applying for U visa relief, VAWA relief, suffered this racialized form of sexual violence and consistently faced challenges from the immigration officers who couldn't see the harm. And although in the end, even with appeals, with request to motions to reopen, all of that, even though they ultimately got approved, it was still, there was something going on and it was still challenging to have to try to explain what kind of harm they suffered. And so that required me and my roles as lawyer, law professor, and now in my leadership role at Casa Cornelia, mostly engaging with volunteers, to continue to constantly go back, reframe, and revisit what I thought I understood, and to help our volunteer attorneys better connect with their clients and understand what challenges they might be facing that might not be readily seen. So one thing we do ask our law interns and volunteer attorneys, and one thing you might want to reflect on as well and might be helpful in working with volunteers, is to ask, what is your positionality? What connects you to this work in human rights, immigration law in particular? What do you hope to learn in working with asylees, victims of gender violence, or abused or abandoned children seeking relief under immigration law, which are the populations we serve? What do you hope to learn about immigration law? And I'm sure there's plenty that they want to learn, but also what do you hope to learn about yourself? And then finally, how do you think this will help you in your career as a lawyer? So again, something that we want our volunteers to think about, especially our law interns. And that brings me now to my colleagues here, the pro bono program has been around for quite a while at Casa Cornelia, and it was intentionally included to make sure that we don't just keep the work in-house, that we allow the opportunity for volunteers, especially in the private sector and our local law firms, to be able to experience the joy of helping somebody through this very difficult, challenging process of immigration law. So Stephanie Beckstrom, our managing attorney, will talk a little bit more about her engagement with volunteer attorneys, and then followed by our support services coordinator, Ismael Aviles, about the special challenges that our clients face. So I will turn it over to you now, Stephanie.
Okay, thank you, Laura. Thank you, Anne. Hi, everyone. So as Anne said, I am the managing attorney for the pro bono program here at Casa Cornelia. And I'll talk with you a little bit about the ways that we are working to sort of integrate this intersectional framework into the way that we work with volunteer attorneys and into their own perspective and the way that they approach their work with clients. And I think, you know, a lot of this people may already be doing, you know, they may already come into the work aware of many ways that they are privileged themselves. They may be aware of certain ways that other clients suffer. But our intention is to sort of expand that lens so that they have a broader perspective and maybe more of an even open-hearted view of the clients that all the clients are going through. So we really try to encourage volunteer attorneys to consider their own position and privilege first as attorneys. You know, if you think about the mere fact that someone has been able to become an attorney betrays the fact that they've had many, many, many privileges along the way. You can't get to this. Not that people don't work hard to get here and do all kinds of things to become attorneys. Of course they do. But there's a lot of other people who work incredibly hard and may never have the opportunity to go to law school. So the, you know, the very fact of being an attorney is already, you know, not only have you been privileged to get there, but it puts the attorney in a position of privilege relative to many people in the world, and definitely relative to their client in that moment, you know, in all kinds of ways, access to resources, ability to articulate themselves, ability to advocate, all kinds of ways that the attorney is already in a position of privilege. But they also may be in a position of privilege, you know, with respect to their client for other reasons. And we try to encourage sort of an exploration of that, you know, with regard to race, class, sex, sexual orientation, religion, nationality, certainly education level, and access to resources. Let me talk a little bit about how we do that. And if you don't mind clicking to the next slide. So how do we do that with volunteer attorneys? You know, first, let me say that right now, this is an informal process. We're in discussions about how to formalize this. You know, right now it happens more in the, you know, candid discussions that we're having with attorneys, you know, as they're considering taking work and as they're maybe taking a pro bono case. We're sort of trying to expand, you know, the perspective that the attorney might come in with. And that's not to say, as I said before, that, I mean, attorneys may already come in very aware of these issues. But sometimes we are blind to a certain issue, even though we're aware of lots of things. So we try to really just expand the lens. And you know, as I said, it's informal now, but it's something that we'd like to have more as a, you know, a part of our whole onboarding process. And the way we do it now is in discussions with the attorney when they're considering taking a case or once they're taking a case, is that we try to paint a picture for them of who their prospective or current client really is, like a picture that is in full color. So you know, that we try to share the person's story in a textured and nuanced way that shows, you know, not just this person is fleeing Guatemala because they are, you know, they're seeking asylum in the US because they were tortured. Okay, that gives you some information. But we try to paint more of a picture of the background, you know, and obviously this is a person who's gone through great difficulty and needs assistance, but we also try to share with the attorney that this client, in order to get to this point, has also demonstrated incredible agency and resilience, because very often they're fleeing something terrible, escaping that situation, somehow making the journey, often across a desert, through a jungle, putting their lives at additional peril, over many days to get to our country. Then once they're here, often not even speaking the language, they've navigated enough to find our agency and advocate for themselves enough to be, seeking an attorney, and we're in the position of looking for one. So this client has this very difficult background, but they've demonstrated great agency. And we also try to open attorneys to the fact that they may learn a great deal from this person, and to be kind of open-hearted in that. I want to share a little bit more now, Anne, if you don't mind switching to the next, going back to that first piece. How do we share, sorry, Anne, sorry, other direction. Sorry, the next, yes, this one, thank you. How do we paint a picture for the attorney of who this client is? So as I said, we definitely share about what they've been through, where they've come from, what it's like in that country. And then we also try to flag prospectively what the attorney might need to really be aware of as they're working with the client. So I'll give you an example of this. So a volunteer attorney eagerly takes a client's case, and they're excited and they're committed. So they're saying, wonderful, we'll meet at 9 a.m. at our office. Great, see you then. Okay, that works really great if you're working with another attorney who maybe, you're having a client meeting with two businesses, and they're all in the same area. But there's often a sort of blindness to the fact that the law firms for here, where we are in San Diego, for example, are in the north, and more North County, slightly more North County. Most of the folks seeking our assistance are living in, downtown or more inland, and public transportation doesn't reach the law firms up in the more affluent areas. So right there, the attorney may have missed the fact that it would be a great difficulty for the client to get to the appointment. So they may have to, there is no public transportation, they may have to take $100 Uber ride. So, so in conversation with the attorney in advance, we'll kind of share that it might be a wonderful consideration to meet at our office, where the client can reach us by public transportation. Or if the meeting needs to happen at the attorney's office, that they see if their firm can subsidize or pay for the client's Uber or something like that. So just sort of, looking at the client and being aware that what seems really easy to us might not be for that client. Similar considerations with parking and also flagging for the attorney. Also, this all is done very delicately, because the attorney might already know all this, and we're not trying to patronize. It's just trying to expand the scope and be sure that things are being taken into consideration. So another consideration is that the client might be food insecure, and one of the things that I used to do when I worked at a law firm and took pro bono clients is I would always order meals for the meetings because the firm was happy to do it. And then I knew my client got a really good meal, at least on the days that they were seeing me. So it's something that, we're not necessarily considering, because we're so abundant that we're not realizing that the client may not be. And the other thing that we try to share about it, and this touches on the sort of trauma-informed lawyering that Anne was mentioning, we try to share that because of what this client has gone through, trauma may show up in many different ways in the way that the attorney and client work together. So the client may not share initially, and they may not share certainly in that first meeting if this person has been raped or they've been tortured. It's not like, hi, how are you? Let's sign the retainer agreement and tell me what happened. Like, it's just not gonna, and I think it's really, I think also sort of sharing with the attorneys that that's okay, that it takes a while. It's okay. We're not trying to work on efficiencies here. We're working with real people, and it's not linear necessarily. And this also comes in, the law firms like to often staff the pro bono cases with several attorneys, usually 2 junior attorneys and maybe a more senior attorney. And so I tend to flag for the attorneys when it's teams like that to be aware spatially of how they're sitting in the room with the client. So they're, if you've got, let's say you have a client and you've got 3 attorneys in suits across the table from them, like, tell us about what happened when, in your most terrible moment. It's already intimidating to have those 3 attorneys looking at them. It's already intimidating to meet with them at all. And so just, and it may be that the attorneys just haven't even thought of it. They all just sat down, right? And they're good-hearted people, but that is not particularly supportive of the client. So, so I'll suggest, okay, if you're going to staff 3 people on this case, can you have one attorney always be primary, that one person, so that the client knows that this person is really their primary attorney? Can you not all be at every, can you not all be at the meeting? It's too much. And if you do have to all be at the meeting, watch where you sit. Somebody sit next to the client, like an ally. So sit where it's not inherently uncomfortable. So these kinds of things, and once we start talking about even 1 or 2 of these things, it just starts to sensitize the attorney a little bit to, okay, there's probably more things like this. So relatedly, we'll share to be careful the time you schedule the meeting. I had a client where we were meeting at 1 o'clock. I was the pro bono attorney. We were meeting at 1 o'clock. We did this like 3 times in a row. The client was never late meeting. And I'm thinking, we're just going along swimmingly here. And the client, like, sort of sheepishly said to me at the end of one of the meetings, is there any way that we could be meeting after 3 o'clock? Because I really need the money. And when I have a 1 o'clock meeting, I have to miss work. And my supervisor is very mad. And I felt heartbroken because of course I can schedule the meeting at 3. I didn't even think to ask what was convenient and helpful for the client. So I think so many of us were good-hearted, but we're a little bit blinded. So same with, childcare needs, things like that. So I don't want to beat a dead horse, but there's a myriad of considerations. And what we're trying to do is to sensitize the attorneys to kind of think about this. Okay, Anne, could you move to the next slide? Thank you so much. Okay, and then finally, we also want to encourage our volunteers that when, now that they're really sort of sensitized and paying attention to what the client does need, then they're flagging those things and bringing them to us. If they're starting to become aware that the client is having, they're food insecure, they're having, they need clothing, they need shelter, they need medical care, maybe they need counseling, and maybe they're open to it. So we're wanting the attorneys to recognize those issues and not to necessarily handle them. We don't really want them to handle them. We want them to bring them to us so that our support services coordinator, who you're going to hear from next, can help to help the client to meet those needs. So if we, if the attorney isn't kind of moving slowly and listening carefully to the client, they might miss the fact that the client is really struggling to eat, or struggling in some way where, because people are proud and they're ashamed to say, I don't have enough money to feed my children, or, and where there's actually help available. If we just knew, that was a struggle. So kind of creating that rapport with the client and, listening and slowing down a little bit really helps volunteer attorneys to be able to flag those issues and share them with us. So our wonderful support services coordinator can help them to get those services. So I will turn this over now to our support services coordinator, Ismail. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Stephanie, and thank you, Anne. This is a really important question, and I think one of the things that we think about my position as a support services coordinator is connecting our clients to their services, but it's much more than that, because I think on the surface level, you would think that it's easy connecting folks to the needed services, but when living in San Diego and being a part of an agency in San Diego, resources are very scarce here. And the other thing within that that we have to also acknowledge is that there's a very different take on social services when you look at it from the legal perspective and from a social service perspective or mind. So that's what we're going to talk about a little bit. But before we go any further, I want to apologize because I am going to give a little bit of my positionality, but I do have the risk of, well, in other words, I hate to self-exalt, so I'm going to keep it really, really basic. Don't like talking about myself, but I think it's important for this discussion. Now, I'm a San Diego resident, born and raised here in Oceanside, California, Chicano Mexicano, grew up through in the 80s and the 90s. Very polemic time here in California, because here in California during those times, there was a lot of politics at that time that were really aggressive and anti people of color. And it really shaped my view of life and my career. And from the get-go, I went into social services because I wanted to make a change. I worked in a domestic violence program for about 5 years, really important because there was a lot of groundbreaking work that was happening here in San Diego at the time. After that, I went into unaccompanied shelter program here in San Diego, about 20 years of experience there, worked as a clinician, worked as a director, regional director, and a lot of understanding of the dynamic of unaccompanied children. So at the same time, I saw on the other side the work that Casa Cornelia was doing. And after 20 years of working at a shelter, it's really taxing. Being on call 24/7 is a difficult thing, and I needed a change in direction. I needed a pivot, and Casa Cornelia came and fell on my lap. And it was a perfect opportunity to make that change and help the organization grow and understand the dynamic between the client, um, their social service needs, and joining in with the organization, a pro bono organization. So that's my positionality. That's what I bring to the table. Really excited about this discussion because I think this is where I've done the bulk of my work, my career. Now, when we talk about intersectionality and positionality, we might think that it's a new term. I think it's a new take more than anything. I think when we talk about intersectionality and positionality, we can go back and look at other paradigms, and we're going to look at one of those, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I think that's really important and a really good visual for us, so we'll talk about that. More recent, you probably heard of emotional intelligence and social intelligence, and I think that those also have parts of the discussion that we're going to have today. But I think when we talk about intersectionality and positionality, it begins to take us away from the subjective and make this discussion more tangible. because I think that that is one of the biggest problems that I would imagine attorneys having with the whole idea of social services, is that social services is a great part, meanders on the whole subjective side, you know, of the psychological, the feelings. Um, a lot of those intangibles are what matter in the whole question of positionality and intersectionality. Okay, so diving into our discussion, one of the things I wanted to acknowledge is the positionality of our clients. So Anne already talked about uh, our organization, but I want to lay it out in this sense. When we're working with clients, we're working with clients that are victims of human rights violations. So that already begins to provide a profile for who we're helping. Indigent persons within the immigrant community in Southern California. So the way we measure that is basically those that fall under the federal poverty guidelines. And along with that, we're focusing on litigation clients, unaccompanied children, and victims of crime. So when we begin to set up that profile, there's a couple of things that we could imagine. One, people that are arriving into the United States, probably with nothing but mere backpack and a couple of phone numbers with them. We're looking at people probably that may have been residing in the United States, but have been in the shadows for the entire time that they've been residing in the United States, but have also are dealing with great levels of trauma, as we see in the victims of crime, or children, right? Children that may have been separated from their parents, and you know, there's just a lot of separation issues that are going on there. So with that in mind, we begin to form the identity of who the clients that we assist. Okay, and can we go to the next slide, please? And as members of that particular community, when we try to connect them to social services, it's a really difficult tale, because when we talk about social services in general, they're grant-based, grant-driven, and there's a lot of boxes that you have to check. For example, we may be looking for housing. Housing is the biggest issue in San Diego. That's no surprise. But at the same time, we might have single male needing housing. So we go out and look into San Diego, and all we find are housing for females, housing for families. A lot of times the males are the last that would have any opportunity to any type of housing. So we have to go through several different boxes, and the referrals that are given often may not lead to much success. So that's why we put the little maze out there. It's the total maze, and the path to social services is not as simple as just handing out a phone number for them to follow up on. It takes a lot of work. It takes a lot of dedication to try to make that correct referral. And can we go to the next slide? And as we go through this, as I promised earlier, looking at our clients, what are their needs? So we begin to understand what their needs are. And I'll go briefly through Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And I apologize for those that, you know, may know of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, or going back to their, you know, first year psychology program at the university. But it still holds true, and hopefully you'll see why. So when we talk about Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we look at the client, and we take into consideration all the things that we acknowledged when we were developing the little profile. And the first rung of the Maslow's hierarchy of needs is the psychological needs, which is air, water, food, shelter, sleep, clothing, and the ability to reproduce. The second level would be safety needs, the personal security, the employment, the resources, the health, the property. The love and belonging, friendship, intimacy, family, sense of connection. And then on the higher end, we have the esteem issues, which is respect, self-esteem, status, recognition, strength, and freedom. And then at the top, the self-actualization. So if we're talking about a client that's coming into Casa Cornelia, was just released from the detention center, made their way here. That's happened on several occasions that we don't know how they got here, but they ended up at our doorsteps, you know? We're talking about a person that doesn't have anything in their pocket, might not have any leads, or may have a couple of leads, but they do know that they need to get to Casa Cornelia. When we look at that situation and look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we're looking at a person that may not have any money for food. They may not have anywhere to sleep that particular night or the remainder of time. Definitely maybe having safety needs and employment needs, health needs, all those issues. So they find themselves at the bottom level. Now, if we were to take this person into Casa Cornelia as a client, it wouldn't be fair for them, based on their positionality at that moment, to participate in a legal meeting. In other words, think about it this way. When an attorney comes to sit down with the client, what is the attorney's positionality at that moment? Most likely they're at self-actualization. I mean, they went through a very rigorous educational path to become an attorney. Stephanie indicated that there is some privileges there. So there's a lot that's going in there, while our client finds themselves at the basic level. So the only way that we can have or expect the client to participate in the meeting is to make sure that we assist them on that path, on their hierarchy of needs. In other words, we have to connect them to the resources so they have some food, they have somewhere to sleep. That's not something that's in the back of their mind the entire time, you know, or they're not suffering from hunger at that moment. So we need to provide that space and help them travel through their hierarchy of needs to get them into a more stable situation. Now, one of the things that I remember very clearly when I was working at the shelter, when we would do intakes with clients, we would, of course, we had to take all the basic information and basically all the demographic data. But we understood very clearly that we wouldn't get any important information for the client, at least for 2 or 3 weeks. And think about it this way, once they would come into the program, we were meeting every one of their basic needs or safety needs. So we were having them travel the hierarchy ladder pretty quickly. But the reason is that it took a while for them to understand the power situation and for them to settle in, you know? So our expectation is that when a client comes into Casa Cornelia, they need to travel this ladder to participate fully within a legal meeting, you know? So that is the job of the support services coordinator, assisting the clients to make progress so they can participate. The other thing that's really important too, within the whole question of intersectionality and positionality, is their perception of power. In a lot of countries, an attorney is as powerful as it gets. I mean, that's the nexus, that's a gateway to resources. And that's also a position of somebody that could get you in trouble pretty quickly as well. So understanding that whole positionality and understanding that we have to normalize the relationship with our clients becomes very important to build a successful case. Okay. Can we get the next slide in, please? So what is the biggest needs that we have here at Casa Cornelia? Well, we talked about San Diego being where we work, well, housing, not only for our clients, but every San Diegan has the issue with housing. It seems like here in San Diego, it's a very difficult space to live in and raise a family. From there, counseling, cash assistance, and medical benefits. The one thing that we want to make sure is that, and make clear, is that here at Casa Cornelia, we're not social service providers. We're tapping into the client's resilience. So what we're doing is providing the leads to those particular resources. So in other words, we have a lot of faith in our clients that they can make it happen, given the opportunity and point it in the right direction. So that's what we're doing, is helping them navigate through those resources here in San Diego. Housing being one of the most difficult ones. So if we go through the traditional methods of providing a housing referral, well, you go on the housing list, that'll take about 2 years, maybe 3 years if you're lucky. And again, that doesn't provide much help in the time, or the homeless shelter here in San Diego, which is, pretty difficult to navigate through as well, just because of how needy housing is here in San Diego. So we tap into those to that resilience of our clients to make sure that we're assisting them in those resources. And I think that's the most important thing that we look at. Again, we have to lower our tendencies more than anything, and accept that our clients do need support. But again, they have the tools within themselves to make that happen. It's just providing that push in the right direction more than anything. And can we get the next slide, please?
So we are going to show you now the video testimonials of 3 of our volunteer attorneys. And again, as we said from the beginning, in our mission statement, it's to educate on the impact of immigration law and policy on the community and public good, in addition to legal services. And what we were able to capture in these testimonials in conversation with our volunteer attorneys was really the transformational impact that it's had on them. So I'm going to go ahead and play this for it's about 2.5 minutes.
I had no idea how much support that we would have from Casa Cornelia. Our case manager was absolutely essential every step of the way. He never left us wondering whether we were doing enough or whether we were going off course. And it gave us the confidence, at least me personally, gave me the confidence to represent these people, even though this is not even remotely my usual area of practice.
One thing I will say that I've always really liked about the cases that I've taken at Casa Cornelia is the mentoring you get from the supervising attorney is just phenomenal. If you want your associates to get some courtroom experience, this is a fabulous way to get it, because you are putting on the case. You're the only one putting on the case. You're examining someone, you're figuring out evidence, you may even have witnesses, and you're having to think on your feet.
I definitely felt this huge sigh of relief for him, and it was very celebratory for me. I'm getting emotional talking about it because they're just so wonderful, and he was so deserving.
This has absolutely felt like the highest use of my bar license ever. It still even chokes me up thinking about some of the cases. I had my first child client in the last year, and typically not a huge crier, but that case, and even still talking about it, will do it to me, because I was just so relieved. I was so relieved she could grow up safe.
But she came, she got her green card, she was able to petition and get her children permission to come to the United States. And she sent me a video of her seeing her children for the first time in 5 years when she greeted them at the airport. And it's just, you know, to have been even a small part of making that happen, I wouldn't give that up for anything.
Okay, now we're open for questions. I'm going to stop sharing. Oh, and I just want to show as well, we have our super essential volunteer interpreter translator program team with us, Artemisa Valle and Myra Duran. And really our clients speak over 100, right? 100 different languages from all over the world, especially in our asylum program. So our volunteer attorneys really benefit from the volunteers for our language support.
Thank you, for taking my question. So we work with the survivors of domestic violence and sexual assault from South Asian community, and we see the need for pro bono, representation so much. We do have some MOU. I'm a DOJ representative, but we do have some MOUs with both People SOS and AIS, but they are also at capacity, right? I mean, every organization is at capacity. And, I was wondering whether there is a direct process for you to work with where we can refer our clients directly to somebody. Like for what in our experience, what we see is if we give our clients a number, they will not call because already they are, they have been in the power control relationship. They don't trust anyone because of the abuse. So if we say that, okay, Nusrat is connecting to Laura, Nusrat is connected to Anne, then they know that, okay, Nusrat trusts Laura or Anne or Stephanie or anyone who you are here, then they will only call. So if you have any of that, a model, then we would really like to work with you all to refer our clients to you directly.
Okay, so I will, turn this over to Ismail, but yes, it is challenging, and it's always very helpful to find those allies in all of these different spaces. But you know how it is within the community-based nonprofit social service sector. Once your ally, moves on somewhere else or completely leaves the field, then you're at it again, trying to build these relationships. So that's really a never-ending process for us here in San Diego County. But I'm going to turn over to Ismail because he's the one having to deal with this on a regular basis at the Law Center.
Thank you for the question. Yeah, yes, that is a major issue when we talk about survivors. It makes it a little bit more complicated. One of the major issues that we have is the traditional services that you find out in San Diego, and I know that it's not only San Diego, but I speak from that because that's where I work, is that the services out there are very specific and narrow in the services that they render in the population. So it seems like you have to always check the boxes to make sure that this person fits that particular criteria. And that's the most frustrating thing that you could imagine, particularly with our DV community. So one of the ways that we try to work around that is that we have to develop relationships and connections outside of that network. So we have to work with the universities. We have to work with individuals in the grassroots level, because that is where we can basically begin to open the doors for our clients because it's the relationship building. So what we do here is we work on in that community, in the grassroots, so faith-based and not necessarily tied with an existing program out there, but all the churches, universities pretty much leave no stone unturned to try to make those connections. And when we have to make a referral for our DV community, we have to manage expectations for one, telling them that resource may not be there, but have faith that we're going to continue to look for those resources until we find them. So we are always plugged in and trying to find a lead. So I think those are some of the more important things, is managing expectations, working with organizations, faith-based organizations, schools, individuals, anyone that is willing to, have a conversation with you on the matter, taking that and trying to connect those resources. I'll show you a quick example. It's not a DV example, but it's one of our asylum clients. Again, housing is a major issue here in San Diego. Wherever you go, wait list, it's just difficult. So in doing research, there was a client that one of our attorneys brought to us that was from Eritrea. And we were looking for organizations to connect out there, and there was nothing out there. But we did come across an organization that was more of a social gathering place, where the community would come and have picnics on the weekend and, just to build community. So the bright idea came, and I consulted our attorney and told her that our client needs to go to this event and be charismatic, be very, talkative, making connections. In other words, we just had to put him in the right place to find those resources. Once there, within a couple of weeks, he found people who he could partner up with, and now he has roommates and is living here in San Diego. So a lot of what we do is basically, yes, there is a traditional resources. We'll go through those resources, but we know that might not be the answer, and we have to look for those alternative routes, be creative, have confidence in our community, have all the confidence in our clients that they'll be able to resolve those issues placed in the right place in the right time. So we're trying to place them in the right place in the right time. Hopefully that answers the question.
So I'm going to highlight, I'm looking at the Q&A. And so one of the questions here is, how do you balance wanting to meet the client's basic needs versus having boundaries and focusing on your role in providing legal representation? I'm going to answer that simply. It's tough. It's really tough. Stephanie, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I want to add that it's tough, but it's critically important because, and this is why we have the support services coordinator role at Ismail, because if our attorneys, the attorneys are uniquely situated to do the legal work. They're the only ones who can do the legal work. There are other organizations or people who can help meet clients' other needs. So we have to stay focused on the legal. And when we identify those other needs, do our best to refer them to an organization that can. So we don't want to ignore the fact that the client needs something, but we're really quite clear with our pro bono attorneys. It's not your job to find them housing. You're the only one who can do the legal work. And that is, if they're deported to their country, it's certain death, in many cases. So, or torture or any kind of thing. So it can't be, their legal work can't be diluted by all this other work. They have to reach out and try to get support from us, or elsewhere to meet those needs.
Yeah, and I want to, there's another question that's related to this. Do you ever have issues with volunteers who want to help clients too much, become financially involved? And if so, how do you help them create boundaries? So, so as I said, I said it's tough. I had worked primarily with victims of domestic violence, and this was before, it was more comfortable to say that you were a victim of domestic violence. This is the early years of the Violence Against Women Act, and a lot of it was underground. But I knew even then, as a young attorney, I can't be everything for this client, and I have to recognize that my client has some agency and got to the United States. And so I was there to try to build that network and try to find that support system. And as Ismail has shared and has done, here at Casa Cornelia, find creative solutions, because we can't always rely on the resources, the usual resources that are out there. Stephanie, do you want to talk about that? I think that's come up as well with our volunteers.
My apologies. I was
wanting to do more.
Yeah, I was reading the other question in the chat, which I think we should also answer.
Yes,
yeah, it's in advance, we try to caution our attorneys that the clients, because of the nature of their social position and where they are in that hierarchy, by nature, they're going to have a lot of needs. And so we try to first caution the attorneys in advance that that's going to be the case. And then in advance, let them know it is not their job to take all of this over, and that we really need them to reach out to us before they are suddenly having the client live with them. And it's just not sustainable. Then that attorney is definitely not going to take another case, because so we try to manage it in advance and then throughout the process. And I wanted to address this other question in the chat, which was sort of centering around, how do you share a client's story to get attorneys interested in taking it without sharing too much, and also without doing that thing that is we all don't like, where they show like an abused animal and then ask for donations or something, those shelter things that you see. So this is definitely a line that we struggle with as well, because usually the way I'll do this is I'll have a call with an attorney who I know is interested in a case and maybe share some of the client story there, or I'm sending it as a case summary where I've taken what I think is compelling from the case and put it into a summary that is then being broadcast to, one pro bono coordinator or many. So there is a dance of trying to put enough in there that people are touched, that they care, versus putting too much. And I have tried to not put any gory details in, but to be a little bit more matter of fact about, if I'm on the phone with an attorney and I'm sharing, let's say, for example, that it's a gay client and they were gang raped and that was their primary harm, I might share that on the phone call, because it's really important that, it's not just like this client was discriminated against. No, this is like far beyond, right? And so there is something to sharing enough that people are touched and mobilized, and inspired to take it. I am more cautious when I'm circulating something in writing and more broadly. Usually, if I'm circulating it that way, I'll try to give information enough that it might pique their interest, and then I'll say, reach out to me, and let's have a discussion. And again, in that discussion is when I'd share. So, and obviously it's all anonymous. I'm not sharing any client details or anything like that, so that any identifiable information about the client. So I hope that answers that question.
And something that helps as well. And when Stephanie had just started, we would get the client summaries, and we discussed this in detail in our legal team meetings on Friday mornings. And there's a lot of information in there. So let's say you end up with 3 paragraphs of the most horrific things that happen. It helps to have an extra set of eyes. So maybe our legal director or I will look at it, and then we will summarize that even more, so that, because it's going to be shared on our constant contact platform with the volunteer attorneys. So, but as Stephanie said, she can share even more specific details more comfortably one-on-one with the attorney that might be interested. So Yeah, and then I know we have a couple minutes left. I just wanted to also address here that there was a part of that question saying, do we have any resources we can share about being client-centered? And yeah, we have plenty. So we can share that afterwards with all of you. And then there were a couple questions about our volunteer interpreter and translators, that the challenge of first placing a case with a pro bono attorney is also having the funds to pay for interpretation services so that the attorney can actually communicate with the client in their language. So, we have an amazing program which has been around for how long, Artemisa? At least since it's formalized, since when?
2012.
2012.
I started in 2010, but the entire program, the onboarding, the whole philosophy, I would point it at 2012.
Yes, and so yeah, it started out informally with attorneys, with the few attorneys that were here, calling their colleagues and friends to help out. But it became essential, especially since the initial focus of Casa Cornelia Law Center was doing asylum work, and with the changes happening around the world and suddenly having a need for certain types of languages, it really needed to be a more formalized program. So we're very happy to share about that, and we're actually going to be talking about this during our Pro Bono Week. So we're happy to share that as well with you all, so you can tune in. It'll be a hybrid event. So I think that's it, and I'll connect you both also with Artemisa, so she can give you more about the language support, recruitment, and onboarding. So, okay, I think we're done.